All right, here we go. It is the System Failure Podcast, number 43. How are we doing, Nate?
Hey, Brian, number 43. That's exciting, and I have rarely been better. I do feel like there are so many exciting things to talk about on the System Failure Podcast that we can scarcely cram it all into one show. So do our best to be reasonably succinct here. Do you have any preamble or small minor issues before we dive into the all the excitement that's going on in America in July of 2024?
Well, I guess just to get into it, this last debate between Joe Biden and the Donald, it is the gift that keeps on giving.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like the fallout from this debate is even worse than the Donald versus Hillary, which was like shocking in the moment in like watching the Super Bowl from like an entertainment factor. But just the way that the establishment is split between either replacing Biden or trying to pretend like nothing is wrong is just too funny to watch.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's like, first of all, I think I mentioned on last week's pod that the Crystal and Sagar clips from Breaking Points, which is where I primarily get my news, me and Tracy, the lovely fiance, have been we've probably been in tears laughing at like 3 or 4 of those over the past couple of weeks. It's just too priceless because the clowns on the news had to pivot from pretending that there was nothing wrong with Joe Biden and that there's something wrong with you if you think there's something wrong with Joe Biden. Love that, the gaslighting. And so you're right, half of them have like now pivoted to be like, okay, well, clearly the man can't walk, talk, or speak. Like, talk and speak mean the same thing, but the man's clearly dysfunctional, and like he's non-functional. It's not he's just. And then they trotted him out. They had George Stephanopoulos interview him on ABC. Did you get a chance to check out any of those hilarious clips?
Well, they're like it's a live uncut recording of Joe Biden that's like 22 minutes long, and he like slurs his speech the whole way through.
Well, the part that had Tracy and me rolling on the floor was when when Biden turned up and the camera. He appeared on camera and he was plastered with orange spray tan, just like the Donald. That is so funny. Like it was he just looked so ridiculous. He looked like a clown up there. The Donald kind of owns his orange spray tan. He's known for being orange. It's like his thing. But the fact that Biden that they had given him the same makeup job they give the Donald was so funny. And you're right. He couldn't even make it through 2 minutes, 1 minute in the interview, let alone all 22. And so it really made for for capital comedy. It was fertile ground for high comedy. Let's say it that way. Wow, yeah. So that's what's been. Yeah, you've got half of the Democrats or half of the media saying that the Democrats have their person, and half of the media saying that this is unconscionable. This man clearly is not well, and we're going to lose to the Donald if we don't get another candidate in there. And the tension between those 2 points is truly priceless. I mean, the level of comedy. We haven't seen this level of comedy since 2016. For me, the 2020 election felt a little bitter, what with all the COVID insanity and the fact that we got denied Bernie again. So I just didn't have a good time during the 2020 election. But 2024 has so far really lived up to the 2016 hype, I would say. Brian, what do you reckon?
It sure has. I mean, my only regret is there's not going to be like another debate where they can try to trot Biden back out there.
There's supposed to be another one, but I think you're right. There's no way they're going to go through with that, right?
It's not until September is the thing, and well after the Democratic convention where it would matter to try to get someone else on there.
Well, if they don't replace Biden, we'll be treated to another hilarious performance. It's in September. There's no way I'm going to be missing out on that too. This debate I didn't bother to watch. I didn't know it would be so funny. And so I've experienced it all through clips online. But I'll certainly tune in to the next one. I just remember the 2020 debates with Biden and the Donald just weren't entertaining at all. But this really takes the cake.
Well, it's that hypernormalization, eh?
Yeah.
I mean, this is how they must have felt in Russia just before the collapse.
Yeah, like no one knows what else to do, so people just kind of go around pretending like everything's totally fine and that our entire society is not on the verge of collapse. It sure is eerie, but I just can't believe. I just really enjoying the comedy this year. It really has been top notch, and it's only July. We've got months and months of hilariousness left, so that's my attitude towards this. This ridiculous election. I can't believe that just the decision trees on everyone's part have just led us down this path of absolute absurdity, and no one's going to make a different decision. And so here we are with like two deeply unqualified candidates, and just no dignity at all. So yeah, it's awesome. I love it.
Should we just say a quick word about hypernormalization? Sure. I just feel like it's just like a linchpin idea for this podcast.
Right.
But I mean, it's especially like, well, there's just the idea of gaslighting, when someone, lies to you and tries to convince you it's the truth. But I mean, it's like when the government's, pissing on you and telling you it's raining. I mean, that's pretty much hypernormalization, right?
Yeah. The term comes from, like you mentioned, the Soviet Union in the 80s, when everyone was aware that the level of dysfunction was so high that something was really wrong. But without I always compare it to the 1917 Soviet Revolution, wherein people had a specific book, like Marx's works, they had a specific vision, they had a specific future they were marching towards. But as the Soviet Union circled the drain in the 80s, there was no vision of the future, and so people you just had no choice but to keep going to work, even though it was meaningless and didn't matter. Hypernormalization, yeah, it's a great term, and it encapsulates 21st century America so very well. And I can't remember who suggested that. You remember there was that guy Francis Fukuyama who wrote a book, or in 1992 after the Soviet Union collapsed, that he called it the end of history. But it really turns out that the dichotomy between capitalism and communism is not so much an adversarial relationship, and I can't remember who suggested this, so my apologies to whoever it was, but instead of being like a one boxer defeating the other, it's more like Thelma and Louise driving their car off the Grand Canyon, the rim of the Grand Canyon, to their deaths, together, versus one of them ever winning. Thelma and Louise is this old movie with Susan Sarandon and Gina Davis, and the idea, one of them or both of them have trouble with abusive men or something like that, so they run away together and become outlaws, but eventually the police track them down, and so they have the choice, either submit to the law or commit suicide by driving their convertible off the rim of the Grand Canyon, to their fiery death below. And the latter option, of course, is the dramatic one they chose for the movie, and that really encapsulates the ride that capitalism and communism have been on since the end of the Cold War. I think that's really funny. Well put, whoever that was.
Well, all right. So I guess, is that to say that the end of communism signifies the end of capitalism as well? Is that the point you're trying to make? Maybe,
yeah. Well, the point is that maybe we were a little too hasty in our victory celebration, and that whatever was wrong with the Soviet Union is also wrong with the United States. But be that as it may, at the very least, even if the two societies have collapsed for totally disparate reasons, we both have had to go through this bizarre period of hypernormalization. And that's where we are right now. So yeah, that's how I feel too. Does it, how many people do you think feel that way? How many people reckon that their jobs are never going to get them into a house? It's got to be a lot of people at this point, a lot of younger people. But no one really wants to be evicted or join the ranks of the homeless. So you just kind of keep going to work and keep paying rent. And what is really the point? I think that has a lot to do with why people don't want to work anymore, quote unquote.
Well, I'm still a change skeptic, I guess. And
you're a skeptic of change, or you're a skeptic who has changed?
I'm a skeptic of dramatic societal revolution, I guess.
Even now, would you have thought 10 years ago that we would have had Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden with all his videos of smoking crack and banging prostitutes and getting in trouble for that, and then the other presidential candidate is facing all these legal trouble, all this. The situation has devolved so crazily. I don't see. I mean, I just feel like I could understand being skeptical of a positive change. You might be worried that this roller coaster only goes down without ever coming back up. But I mean, we definitely are moving, right? I mean,
well, I think you'd have to assume, based on the debate and everything that's happening, that the Donald's going to win. And so, what'll happen if the Donald wins? Well, it's not really going to spell the end of capitalism, and probably, I mean, I would predict that it would, some kind of peace agreement will be reached in the Ukraine, which will end or reduce the likelihood of nuclear war, which is a good way that we could get snuffed out.
But I mean, this year, we're going to spend more on interest on our treasury bonds, like paying the people who bought our treasury bonds. We're going to spend more on that than all of the defense combined, or at least all of the budgets we're allowed to know about for defense. That's a huge amount of money, and it's going to be a lot more next year and a lot more the year after. We are in an exponential death spiral just with respect to sovereign debt, let alone the rest of the massive amounts of debt that we've got arrayed against us. So to me, it's like a question, what's going to destroy capitalism first? The fact that robots replaced us and took all our jobs, or the fact that fractional reserve lending creates more debt than dollars of currency in the economy at any given one time, and that the amount of debt keeps going up, keeps piling up and accumulating. So anyway, carry on. So change skeptic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the system that's in place is just pretty powerful, and you're going to have your people on top of the system, your people on the bottom. You're going to have your silverback gorillas. Well, I mean, we can just wait and see.
Well, despite the size and the wealth and the sophistication of our system, the best that it can come up with for public consumption is the clown show that we're currently embroiled in vis-a-vis the 2024 election, eh?
What would your advice for like young people be, right? I mean, I think the best advice would be how to like negotiate the system rather than like wait for it to dissipate, right?
Yeah, I think my advice to young people would be, I guess I would, if I really wanted to put my money where my mouth was, what you should do is max out your debt in US dollars, but buy assets that will still have value when the US dollar doesn't. But I think the smarter thing might be to not go into debt, but don't hold US dollars, or don't hold treasury bonds. You try to buy real things, trucks or firewood, things that are going to have value no matter what. And then no matter what value system replaces our current system of negotiating value, you'll have something to, offer. I guess I would just steer clear of debt and do that.
Aren't you saying to go into debt to buy these real assets?
Yeah. Well, I would hedge my bet by just buying real assets with the money you have and not going into debt, just in case the runway turns out to be a lot longer than you think, because that's what happened to me. I thought this whole system was slated for collapse in like 2017. And here it is 2024, and we're still limping along. But I've said it on the pod many times. Brian and I shall put it out there again. I think that the real drop dead date was 2008. I think the history books are going to have 2008 as like the death date of the U.S. empire, 1776 to 2008. I think that's going to be the thing. That was the date at which we addressed a huge debt explosion on the part of our oligarchy, on the part of our like rich and powerful, and we bailed them out and connected with we destroyed the integrity of the dollar in order to bail these people out, turning what should have been their private debt problem into a looming sovereign debt crisis, and with the quantitative easing that's still going on to this day.
Well, I think my advice for young people would be to be smart.
Can you be any more specific, Ryan?
And make high percentage plays.
These are so advice.
Probably going into six figures of debt for a liberal arts degree is not a high percentage play.
Yeah, I wouldn't go into any debt at all for these college degrees at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in agreement there. I guess we've talked about it before, but you gotta eat healthy food, and I don't know. I guess be ready to adapt to change. But I think you do want to try to accrue real assets, and I guess not fall for the tropes of social media. Or, I don't know, how important do you think it is to travel? I guess probably pretty important, right?
I don't think. The lessons you learn from traveling, it's a long Santa's list of benefits you get from traveling. So I would definitely recommend that. I guess I would recommend. Get yourself in a productive feedback loop versus a consumptive feedback loop. But you also have to go out and, you have to live, you have to do things in your life you have to make mistakes and learn from them. But if we're trying to minimize the number of mistakes, then I would definitely recommend 5 dried grams to the dome, in some kind of, you should try mushrooms at least once just to be able to triangulate on reality.
Well, what do you think about the merits of pursuing a career, I guess is what I want to get at.
That I would put under the get into a productive feedback loop versus a consumptive one, right? If you are working so that you can afford to buy the junk, the virtual junk that's on the loot crates in Call of Duty. Well, now you're in a consumptive feedback loop, and you get a shot of dopamine when you get a new piece of armor for your character, right? And then you just end up chasing that dopamine hit, or smoking weed all day every day, or whatever the thing, or having a terrible addiction to internet pornography. All of these things are consumptive feedback loops, and you end up repeating this consumptive behavior. And you got to do something that is productive. It doesn't even really, it could be programming a video game, it could be anything, but it's something that other people are meant to consume. And if you can get caught in that feedback loop and get obsessed with that versus get obsessed with consuming someone else's breadcrumbs, then I think you're in a much better place. Now, you've got to find the big theme of my life has been being in jobs that are just boring and appalling, and you're just waiting for the end of the day every day. And you really want to be doing something productive so that you're not even noticing when the sun goes down. When I type up my Substack articles, I just can't believe how many hours pass. I just get totally lost in it and just no awareness of the clock. And I just can't believe that it's 5:45 already and time to go visit Brian to make the latest edition of the System Failure Podcast. So, you want to, there is no torture worse than just having to kill 8 hours every day. And then the weekend blows by and then you're back at your desk on Monday morning with another 5 days of torment ahead of you to get through. That is a tough way to be strung out on having to sit at a job that's just not engaging. These are all of I think these are the pieces you want to, trips are important, mushroom trips and jet airliner trips, overseas for the same reasons. Productive feedback loops are important. Consumptive feedback loops are dangerous. I feel like I forgot one piece of advice, but this is when I think about younger folks, these are the things that I wish I had been clued into when I was younger. Unfortunately, I was clued into none of them, and so those were the most painful slings and arrows of outrageous fortune come from the regions that I just covered with these little pieces of advice.
Entropy has a way of coming for you, huh?
Yeah. Well, yeah, we're all doomed in the end. That's for sure.
All right. Well, I guess on to the next topic. Conversation here. On this podcast, we have talked about Carl Jung a bit, and we're into alchemy. And, Jimmy Dore was on Joe Rogan, and he's pretty big into the Carl Jung and the alchemy. And so, I just recorded this little clip here.
Nice. All right. Yeah, lead us off with a clip, and then we shall discuss.
All right, here we go.
So you were saying, before I interrupted you, that you think that it was a higher calling, that like quitting pot.
So I started, and when COVID happened, I started getting into Carl Jung and my unconscious and analyzing my dreams. And then I realized that that there is what Carl Jung calls God is a transpersonal self. And he's the one who kind of figured out we have a collective unconscious that we're all. So there only is one conscious. You've done DMT and all shit, so you get all that. But he was able to give himself like a mushroom trip when he was conscious without taking mushrooms, right? And he would call it active imagination. So he could go into his unconscious and confront all these things that like archetypes and God that lives in your unconscious, and he had to have a person that was there to make sure he didn't go crazy. And so he did this for like 4 years, from like 1913 to 1917, and he wrote it down in a thing called the Red Book, which he would not allow to be published for 50 years after he died. Whoa. Because he knew if people read it, it would discredit his work in psychology, because it sounds crazy, all the shit. It's like he had mushroom trips and he would write it down, right? But it was real. And so what he did, during those 4 years, he then spent the rest of his life trying to explain to people what he had learned in those 4 years in ways that they could understand it. And so that's what the rest of his life was about. And they asked him, do you believe in God? He says, I don't believe in God, I know. And I was like, man, that's badass when you can say shit like that. And so anyway, I started to get into this. And so he figured out that we have a collective unconscious, because he would see these symbols in his dreams. And he knew that they were like meaningful, but he didn't know what they meant. And then he started to study alchemy, which alchemy isn't what you think it is. Alchemy was about turning a psychological lead into psychological gold, and they were onto a lot of shit, and they had to keep it secret because of the church, I guess, and so they had to speak in code, kind of. And so he started to read alchemy, and he started to see these symbols that were in his dreams that they had written about, and they had already figured out what it meant. And he was like, well, how the fuck could I have a dream about something I didn't know I never read this book before. I don't know and that's how he started to figure that out. And so that shit has happened to me.
Well, interesting stuff, eh, Brian?
Well, there's a lot going on there, you know, with the alchemy and the archetypes. I mean, one thing I like about it is, see, I think that the things you need were like we were equipped with. Like, I think that, you know, your dreams are, you know, pretty important. And we should probably all be keeping dream journals and, you know, writing down, like, it seems like important stuff. I mean, I think we have what we need, right? And, like, I don't know, Jimmy Dore here is doing it. He's writing down his dreams. Carl Jung was doing it. And yeah, like the alchemy, like alchemy is like a big deal. Like, this tradition, like turning your psychological lead into gold. Like that, like, does seem like the name of the game. And, worth focusing on.
Boy, alchemy is a dense subject, so I'm not even sure which line of inquiry to take here. But traveling, you mentioned traveling. Two travel destinations were like very alchemical, in the sense that, well, there was Florence. First of all, the ruling family of Florence is Medici, the bankers. These guys were obsessed with alchemy, and they were really obsessed with alchemy to the point where they kept weird cabinets full of strange alchemical wonders, Wunderkammers they called them. You'd have like a narwhal tusk in there, or like hairballs, strange things that were thought to have magical properties. The Medicis would grind up various gems into powders and then consume them in their food and drink because they thought they had magical or healing properties. It was something that they took very, very seriously. Now, the history of alchemy comes from Hermeticism. Right? Like, Hermeticism is this magical tradition from the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. Most of the writings on the Corpus Hermeticum come to us by way of 2nd and 3rd century Alexandria, the city, the city of Alexander, and the ocean, on the part of the Nile Delta that's on the ocean, where the old lighthouse of Alexandria once stood, and the great library also. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries, all kinds of people lived there. Jews lived there. All manner of different Christians, like Donatists, the proto-Christian sects. Yogists from the Near East. All of these different kinds of what do you call it? Not magical, but like spiritual traditions. It was a big melting pot for all of these things. And out of that comes the Corpus Hermeticum, 11 books, which are, I think it's the Asclepius, and then 10 treatises on Hermeticism. And this body of work was lost when Christianity took over the Roman government in the 3rd century. This is when the Library of Alexandria burnt. So these like all the works of Plato were lost at this time too, right? So like all of this stuff is gone in a Holocaust where, you know, the emperors of Rome were trying to consolidate power, right? Their empire was falling apart. This should sound familiar because this is happening to us today. Their empire was falling apart. And so they basically burnt all the pre-Christian. They destroyed all the pre-Christian knowledge. They were like, shake the Etch-a-Sketch. We're going to start new, and we're going to just have Christianity be the only religion that's accessible to people. We're going to try to establish a Christian monopoly, a spiritual monopoly, in other words. And so that was in the 3rd century, 4th century. And then you had a whole other cycle of civil, right? Rome falls, and from its ashes arise medieval society, and then medieval society eventually becomes corrupt, right? The Pope is so corrupt that he's charging people for sin forgiveness, and eventually the Pope is discredited by the Black Death, and medieval society totters and collapses, right? The Black Death causes a labor shortage that destroys the medieval economy. And now here we go again. Now people start becoming interested in going. The great motto of the Renaissance was ad fontes, or back to the source. And you gotta realize that for the Medici, right, they live amongst the ruins of Roman civilization. Right? The aqueducts don't work anymore, but the ruins of the aqueducts are right there for everyone to see. And like, they knew they couldn't build something as great as those aqueducts again themselves. Right? This is where you get the strange nostalgia that oozes through the pages of J.R.R. Tolkien. He has here's a signpost, and it's been standing for, all these ages, and here's the history of it. There's this sense that there was a great civilization. You remember the sentinels that guard the river or the waterfall or whatever in Fellowship of the Ring, right? You just have this impression that there used to be this great society, and you're living now in the ruins of it. Well, this is what was happening with the Medicis. And they saw the Catholic Church falling apart, and they saw the medieval economy crumbling, and they thought, all right, well, we got to do what you do when you lose your car keys. Go back to the last place you remember having them. And the last time that things made sense to the medieval mind was, of course, the Roman Empire, classical Greece and Rome. And they sought to resurrect the traditions of Greece and Rome. So literally the Medicis paid agents to go out to the corners of the Mediterranean and recover these crumbling old manuscripts and try to find us like the works of Plato. These things we've only heard about in legend, but we know exist. Interestingly, I think the works of Plato, I think the Muslim world always knew about them. I don't think they ever lost them. Or at least they had them from the 7th century onward. But whatever the case may be, the Medicis dug up. The other thing that was happening was at this exact moment, the Turks were seizing Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, and the eastern half of the old Roman Empire. And so all the Greek manuscripts there were getting scattered to the winds. And so too were the Greek scholars. Guys like Gemistus Pletho, who turned up at the Council of Florence and got the Florentines very, very excited about Greek civilization, Greek culture. Well, at any rate, that is a very long story, but the long and short of it is that eventually Medici agents, I think John Argyropoulos was the name of the guy who in one of the libraries of Constantinople found a copy of the Corpus Hermeticum and rushed it back to Florence. And the main translator of Greek and Latin the main translator of Greek into Latin for the Medicis was this guy Marsilio Ficino, who founded a resurrection of Plato's Academy right there in Florence. And this man was busily translating the works of Plato when this crumbling old manuscript of the Corpus Hermeticum arrived, and the orders from the patriarch of the Medici clan, Cosimo de' Medici, was, all right, you're going to halt the translation of Plato. Cosimo was very old at this point. He had only a few years to live, and as much as he cared about Plato, Plato is the central pivot about which all of Western philosophy turns. But even knowing that, old man Cosimo was like nuts to Plato. I want you to get to work, Marsilio Ficino. I want you to get to work on the Corpus Hermeticum, because that is I want to crack at that magical book before I die. And that's what happened. And as a result of this is how the Medicis became obsessed with alchemy. The Renaissance magic comes from the old Hermetic tradition. So alchemy makes me think of the Renaissance in the 15th and 16th century, whereas Hermeticism makes me think of the 2nd and 3rd century in Alexandria. Now, it's worth mentioning, I think, that the Renaissance, the denizens of the Renaissance believed the Corpus Hermeticum to be much, much older than 2nd and 3rd century. They didn't think they were reading things from the Roman Empire. They thought they were reading Egyptian texts that were the Prisca Theologica was these three guys, Orpheus, Moses, and this guy Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes thrice blessed. Hermes is the Greek messenger god with the winged feet. Thoth is the Egyptian messenger god with the ibis head, the bird head, and Moses. So like Hermes, Mercury, and Thoth. These figures are all amalgamated into this one character in the 3rd century. And as mentioned, the Medici and their ilk thought that had happened, around the time of Moses, but obviously they were mistaken. It wasn't until a century or two after the fact that philologists realized, this text comes from ancient Rome. It's not from like ancient Egypt. But the point is that all of that morphed into this alchemical tradition that was like really important in Florence. There's the notion of you remember this book, Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist? Did you have to read that in school, Brian? That was a boilerplate in freshman English when I matriculated through Hebron Academy.
I did not.
The book's plot is basically that you go on a quest searching for something, but that thing, but that's just your navigational aid, right? The point is that we've said it before, and here the point is that it's the journey that's important. Right? The journey is the true destination. And the Medici created a hedge maze that was like a physical. It was a way of telling that story, or they were conveying that idea with the physical hedge maze. But so that really blew my mind. I mean, between the narwhal tusks and the hedge mazes that are alchemical, It was really something else. I mean, this was all happening at a time when the Catholic Church was very powerful, and promoting paganism or pagan ideas at this time was kind of dangerous. But the Medicis had such wealth and such power; they were able to challenge the Vatican in this way.
Well, so that all seems like a little esoteric, or I don't know. Maybe we need to get some like narwhal tusk and grind it up and see how that treats us. But well, I just think the interface, like we talk about like interdimensionality or whatever, in this stuff, like if with this question about whether like humanity is going to like transcend the fourth dimension.
Yeah.
And I just think that probably like the real work is that alchemical matter of transforming your alchemical lead into gold. And I don't know. Like, we should probably both be figuring out how to get into like a Jungian psychologist or get into Jungianism and be keeping dream journals and whatnot. Yeah.
Well, so there's this Platonic idea that there's like the realm of ideas, which the right ideas are perfect and pure and incorruptible, and then there's the lumpen, imperfect realm. Right? There's the perfect idea of a chair, and then there's the reality of a chair, which is never, you can recognize as a chair with reference to that Platonic ideal. But the chair is imperfect, indestructible, and these two concepts are like symbolized with lead on the one hand and gold on the other. And of course, Platonism was very, very important to 2nd and 3rd century Alexandria. It's how so many Platonic ideas made their way into Christianity. And so Platonism and Hermeticism are not unrelated. It makes sense that the main book is called the Asclepius. That's the Greek god of medical well-being, or the Greek doctor god. The staff of Asclepius is still the symbol for the medical profession to this day, the staff with a snake wrapped around it and the wings. Also called the staff of Hermes. There really does seem to be there's a topography to this mental realm of imagination that Jimmy Dore is saying that I think we may have cut the clip early, but he eventually says that he was seeing symbols. He came upon symbols that he had previously seen in his dream in just the way that Carl Jung had. So there's some kind of topology to the realm of ideas. We think of our dreams as just our brain misfiring when we're sleeping, but really there's a topology to be explored there, and that is what the exploration of alchemy is all about.
He goes on to talk about like there's just archetypal things that happen. Like there's like an old man that comes and visits you in your dreams, and I guess that's the voice of God or whatever.
Yeah.
And he was just talking about how like he was trying to take like a shortcut, and then the old man told him he had to go like to the end of the line.
Well, this was a real life thing that happened, or no, it was his dream.
Yeah.
But he was in some mundane situation, like at the movie theater or something, trying to cut in line, and the old man was like, "Back of the line, Chumley." And so that's what, but then he said he had some real life version of that that he had to navigate, but he didn't want to get into the details because it's too personal.
Right.
Probably a raging porn addiction, if I had to guess.
Well, I mean, I think the Platonism helps to understand like how like the collective unconscious might work, and it kind of gets you to, it's like a rational explanation for how like the realm of ideas is superior to the physical realm, and that kind of explains how something like collective unconscious might work.
Superior to it, meaning there is a hierarchy, but like superior in the sense that your body is superior to the shadow that it casts on the sidewalk, right? One is a lower dimensional reflection of the other.
Yeah, it's like it's superior in that it's a higher dimensional idea that's manifesting into this world, and because without it, you're kind of stuck just being like an atheist.
Yeah. This was the exact analogy used by Plato in Book 7 of the Republic, right? The analogy of the cave. It's shadows on the wall. You're mistaking shadows on the wall for reality.
Yeah. And so, see, I just don't really think that transcending like the fourth dimension is like really like the mantle of man. Although, I mean, it is crazy with all the stuff going on in science and whatnot. But I mean, I just probably like whatever like you're dreaming about and the struggles in your life probably are this battle with like this like lead and trying to turn this lead into gold. I think is probably really the name of the game. I guess is my intuition. Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure that I've thought about it as explicitly as I'm about to state it, but I just have this feeling that the conquest of the space-time continuum or the conquest of the fourth dimension that sounds exactly like just the sort of great work that the whole idea of alchemy is centered around, right? The idea is that each individual alchemist is supposed to create this great work, and that's what you want to throw all of you. You can't preserve your body, your being. You can't preserve your body and mind. Those things are temporary, and so you must use them to complete this great work, which is like one of the ways that alchemy teaches people to think about themselves. So I don't know. I kind of feel like the conquest of the fourth dimension might very well be the great alchemical project of the 21st century.
Well, I mean, I feel like we already have conquered it, or like we already are like a reflection of like this fifth dimensional thing, right? And I mean, see, conquering it, like as I've said before, it seems like conquering it's more like a spiritual matter, and really realizing that we are this like reflection of some higher dimensional thing. And so, but I mean, it is interesting to see what's going on in like the material scientific realm as they try to like bore into that. I just can't imagine where it goes, but it just seems like there's so much to do like within this material realm we have already. So it'll be really mind-blowing if we expand into that somehow. But it just seems like there's plenty of like story to play out without that kind of madness. But of course we do sort of appear to be being thrust headlong into it. So yeah.
I do think that the conquest of space-time, we are perceiving that you could, at this stage in the game, it feels to me like humanity is just waking up to the idea that we can step outside of space-time. I think that the emergence of Jungian psychology, I mean, the man was publishing his books in the early 20th century, and now they're coming to fruition in the 21st century. Same with what's-his-face, the Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann, who synthesized LSD in 1937. Right, that catalyzed like the Beatles to go from the "I Want to Hold Your Hand" to like the White Album, "My Guitar Gently Weeps." Right, they had that crazy. They went and visited the Maharishi in India and popped a bunch of LSD. Isn't that the story? And then the next thing you know, they went from the pop of the early Beatles to like Sgt. Pepper's. Or there's the fact that the aforementioned Dr. Hoffman sent a letter to Steve Jobs after the invention of the iPod in like 2008, asking him about his experiences with LSD, because Jobs had been very public about how integral LSD had been to the success of Apple in the computer revolution of Silicon Valley in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It really feels like everything. Aldous Huxley's another one of these crazy examples. In his book, Doors of Perception, and Aldous Huxley, the man who wanted to be injected with LSD on his deathbed, and when it was happening, he was in the depths of a crazy, the story, he was in the depths of a crazy trip, and his wife was like, "Is everything okay?" And he signaled for more LSD. Even in the last moments of his life, you're like, wow, this guy really put his money where his mouth is. I do not think that I would want to do psychedelics on my deathbed. Or maybe that's the one and only way to do them. But the point is, it does feel to me like everything is moving into place for this. You could call it the conquest of space-time, but you could also call it the destruction of the illusion of individuality. And that's where I was really going with this long diatribe. That I think that the delusion of individuality and alchemy have a lot of overlap for that specific reason. So yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting. There are 1,000 different things about alchemy that we could talk about. We could talk about as above, so below, symbolized by the Star of David. It's like the up arrow and the down arrow combined into one 6-pointed star. And it reflects so much of nature is that way. The Bohr model of the atom and the solar, the way the solar system is structured, seem to be similar. Or the root structure of trees below the soil and the branch structure above the soil are reflections of each other. There's so much of this weird old ancient wisdom baked into these texts. It seems to come around every time the empires start dying, right? Roman Empire falls, you get Platonism in the form of Christianity. Medieval society falls, you get Platonism in the form of Renaissance magic, alchemy. Capitalist society, postmodern modern society falls, we are creating the Platonic or alchemical or hermetical, whatever it is, the hermetic reality or the goal or whatever it is, whatever we're doing has to do with those things, I think.
Well, I think my mission for the System Failure Podcast is to keep a dream journal, and I'll report back how it goes.
Nice. All right, yeah, we definitely should do that dream journal. All right. Well, is that all we wanted to say about alchemy on this day, Brian? I can't think of anything else. I don't know if you've got any more thoughts.
I think that'll wrap it up.
I didn't mention going to Prague and visiting the Golden Row there, the Golden Mile, they have inside Prague Castle. The old Holy Roman Empire, Rudolph II had all of these. He brought all the alchemists to Prague, and he had them all living in these row houses. That's why they call it the Golden Row. And you can still go visit them to this day. In fact, we went to an alchemy museum in Prague that was hilariously tawdry, meaning that it was like weird wax sculptures and a crazy man giving the tour. But I saved all of the material in my phone, the PDFs from that exciting voyage to the Prague Alchemy Museum. Maybe I'll review some of them and bring it in for our dear listeners next week, in light of this crazy Jimmy Dore pod. I think it has to be done.
All right.
Oof. All right. Well, I have today. So, returning to the notion of Platonism and specifically science, I wish to reference another recent JRE. Unlike you, Brian, I didn't make a clip for it because it was a brutal 4-hour slog, really, with Dr. Eric Weinstein, the eminent physicist, and Terrence Howard, the rapper, actor, and wannabe physicist. Now, for those not in the know, Terrence Howard has this whole manifesto about the true nature of reality. He has these ideas about Platonic solids. For those who don't know about the Platonic solids, there are, I believe, 5 of them. And the thing about Platonic solids is that you get weird when you take a cube, right? A cube has 8 vertices, 6 sides, 6 faces, and is it 8 edges? Yeah, it's 12 edges. And those numbers, 3, 6, 8, 12, 20, they come up all the Platonic solids. These are like the magical numbers. And the point is that they're like shapes. It's like cube, icosahedron, dodecahedron. And they have very odd properties that made Plato believe that they were the basis for all of creation. A lot of times when you see when you see paintings of Plato, he's holding these. He'll be holding like a dodecahedron and contemplating it ever so seriously. And so Terrence Howard, I keep wanting to say Terrence McKenna. Terrence Howard, he's got all these ideas about how you can extrude the Platonic solids with curved lines instead of straight ones, and you start to get some even more strange coincidences that have to do with curvature and calculus. And so Eric Weinstein was on the JRE. The ideas are so dense, they're so difficult to. You really gets to it gets to hardcore calculus and the root of creation. And so Joe Rogan, having no way to parse any of this madness, brought in the esteemed and aforementioned Dr. Weinstein to try to make some sense of it. And Dr. Weinstein said, you have some ideas that are good, some that are crazy, but we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And we're really sorry that Terrence Howard had gotten laughingly rejected by the black science man. What's his name?
Neil deGrasse
Tyson. He had been sort of mugged off by Neil deGrasse Tyson and told to go get his peer review. And Eric Weinstein was saying he knows that if you don't even have a .edu email address, he knows you're going right in the trash bin. He knows you're not going to get your fair day in court with the scientific establishment. So instead of a peer review, I'm here to give you an elite review. And let me tell you, some of these ideas have merit, even though there's a lot of water to baby ratio in this bathtub. There's definitely some baby there, then we don't want to throw it out. But then Dr. Weinstein had a longer diatribe on the state of science itself, which I found to be very fascinating. And this one anecdote, everyone should go check out the pod, but this one anecdote I will now relate to you, which I found to be very interesting. Now, the name of the person who perpetrated the crime I'm about to describe, I'll leave till the end in the attempt to gin up a little bit of drama here. So let me describe what happened in the 1960s, and then I'll tell you who was responsible for perpetrating this. And it should blow your mind. It should feel like, okay, there's something going on here. So let me first talk about the Pergamon Press. We all know when you talk to anyone, especially on Reddit, about science today, they care only about peer review and nothing else. They're looking for peer-reviewed studies, peer-reviewed this, peer-reviewed that. No one lends any credibility to anything that is not peer-reviewed. But if you go on the internet and you go to Google Ngrams, that's letter N, Grams, and Google Ngrams. The Google Ngrams operates by compiling the frequency of every word in the English language for the corpus of every English word published in a given year. So it goes, you can drag the slider to go from like 1901 to 2019, and you can see any word you want to search. You can see there's a graph, a histogram representing.
Maybe I'll just pull it up here. All right, I pulled up the Google Ngram.
All right, now if you were to enter in the term peer review into the search bar, and you can search for all instances of the word peer review between the years. What is this? Does it go back to 1500?
It does.
Wow, I thought it only went back to like 1901. All right, so whatever age range you choose, you will see that peer review is virtually unheard of until the mid 1960s. The graph just moves along moves along, going nowhere until 1960, where the graph suddenly spikes up, and that's where you get suddenly everyone cares about peer review. It's like everyone decided peer review was important simultaneously in 1965.
It's true.
Yeah. The story goes thus. Now, I had first thought that I should, get some links to back this up, but when I went to look into the story, it was so trivially easy to confirm that it would be insulting to include a link. Anyone can look this up on the internet. It's like not at all controversial. What happened in 1965 was that a particular gentleman decided that he was going to corner the market on scientific journals, scientific publications. And he realized that if he created peer review as a kind of gate, to which no scientific research could ever be considered legitimate unless it passed through that gate, then he realized that every college in the United States, in the UK, every college in the US, in North America and Europe, worldwide, would have to subscribe to these journals. He would create an annual subscription for these journals, going on indefinitely, and he sought to multiply the number of trade journals from just a handful to all the way up to 150. So this man got really wealthy. Now, on to the man himself. This man was a Czech. Speaking of Prague, he was from Czechia, and he fought on the side of the British during World War II. And because of that, he resettled in England after World War II, and he was a spy during the war, and he was a spy after the war as well, for the Israeli intelligence outfit, the Mossad. And so he got rich off of this scientific journal scheme. So rich that he bought a place called Headlington Hall in England, which is really one of these stately old manor houses in the British countryside. And the name of the gentleman in question was Robert Maxwell.
Is that the Maxwell House coffee guy?
That's a different one. No, this is the Robert Maxwell who is the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, the noted consort of Jeffrey Epstein, who himself was going around in the late 90s and mid 2000s interviewing scientists like the aforementioned Dr. Eric Weinstein, who got invited to his crazy Manhattan mansion to talk about science. And so this really goes to show that there's some weird relationship between the intelligence services and economics and science. Dr. Weinstein's theory is that the whole idea, a lot of what's been perpetrated on science has to do with the removal of funding of our universities in the 70s and 80s, so we could afford tax cuts for the wealthy. And when that happened, there was no financial security to be had for the scientists themselves who were doing all this work, and so the whole discipline has lapsed into a defensive fraud where older people are trying to protect their reputation and their economic status or their job. They're trying to keep their job, and indeed that is the fundamental problem with peer review, because peer review only can make the distinction between orthodoxy or not orthodoxy, the establishment and the outsider, and all peer review does is underscore or emphasize or reiterate the establishment position to the exclusion of all outsiders. And that's a real problem because good ideas always come from the crazy fringe, right, Brian? Just like this System Failure podcast. And so if you block out all the crazy new ideas, you stop progress in your tracks.
Right.
Wholesale.
Well, I think it's important because when people think Epstein, you think like Epstein Island and having politicians over and, drugging them up and having them bang underage people for the purposes of like blackmail to maybe keep our military industrial complex going. And so, Eric, it's really fascinating that with Eric Weinstein, hearing him talk about how, just Epstein was like super interested in like the scientific establishment. Well, not as like some kind of scientist, but obviously he's interested in the control.
Right. They're the arbiters of reality. So if you control that priesthood, you control everyone.
Right. And I just don't think that people really understand. But this engram, it really makes it clear, and understanding that like Ghislaine Maxwell's father is like the progenitor of this like crazy business. It just makes it how clear like the whole scientific establishment is under the control of like the same people who run like our military industrial complex, right? And so there just is like a scientific industrial complex as well, trying to keep everything going in a direction that's good for the establishment. And so, I mean, you really should Google the engram and put in peer review here and realize that like it's basically Epstein who's behind all this, right? It's wild stuff.
Yeah. So continuing on the subject of science, there is this we've been talking about dreams nonstop this pod, and when you're dreaming, you're simultaneously creating and experiencing the reality that's everything that's going on. You're the experiencer, but also the creator. But science, it's funny, Christianity and science both say, well, that's a heresy. You don't create the reality. That's what magic is all about. The idea that your brain controls reality. That is a heresy, according to the Catholic Church. According to the Christian Church, there's a God, and the God does all the creating, and your only job is to experience. You are not comparing yourself to the God is heresy. But this is exactly what the Corpus Hermeticum says. You must make yourself equal to God, it literally says, for only like can understand like. And if you are indeed creating the reality in your dreams, if there is any analog in real life where we're creating this reality instead of experiencing it, well, science has a big problem. Why? Because science is based on the fiction of an objective observer. And if there is no such thing, that they had to sail right past that assumption just to set up shop. And now, in the 21st century, the placebo effect and the delayed choice experiment and the double slit experiment are really starting to show that there's something wrong with the fundamental assumptions of science. But the scientists can't let all us plebes know about that, right? If they let the normies like you and me find out that we're creating this reality as much as we're experiencing it, then people will stop going to work and you'll just have total social chaos. And so I think that that's another reason that the science has been stagnant, low these past 50 years. And I also want to just put another bookmark. People don't realize how Platonistic science really is. Brian, I wonder if you know why nylon is called nylon.
I don't.
It's because it was invented simultaneously in New York and London. They didn't know what to do. Two groups of people invented it, so they called it NY-LON, New York, London. Mm-hmm. Do you remember the movie Waking Life? The one that has Alex Jones in it, where the guy immolates himself. Crazy movie.
Who could forget?
In that movie, there's an anecdote about the New York Times and the crossword the crossword puzzle editors, who found that crossword puzzles that had been solved by many people could be solved much quicker by a new group of people who didn't know about the solution than a crossword puzzle where only one person knows about the solution. Now I can't recreate that anywhere on the internet quite yet. I was trying before this podcast. I'll let you all know next week what I find out about that story. But it matches so many stories it matches so many stories in the history of science that I think I have no choice but to just go through a few of them right now. So we talked about the crossword puzzle thing. We talked about New York and London, but then there is the matter of René Descartes, whose philosophical musings or realizations are fundamental to the modern world in the way that Plato was fundamental to antiquity. He invented the Cartesian coordinate system we all remember from school with the X and Y axes. He was the cogito ergo sum guy. I think, therefore I am. All of this, but according to his biographer, all of those crazy ideas stem from a single pivotal night. On the evening of November the 10th, 1619, Descartes hunkered down inside a tiny shed to escape a howling snowstorm. During the night, he had a series of dreams in which a divine spirit had visited him and announced that the conquest, like an angel, is telling him the conquest of nature is to be achieved through number and measure. If you go to Descartes' Wikipedia page, it'll suggest that this was a case of exploding head syndrome. I don't even know what that is, but it sounds like a wild experience. But it's certainly odd that this man was able to revolutionize Western philosophical thought based on this experience. It really makes it seem like there's some source of information out there that's not the individual mind, or that ideas like nylon or like the crossword puzzle once they exist out there. It's like when the idea's time has come. The idea's time has come, and everyone and multiple people at the same time have the idea. Right? It's like the idea has a form all of its own. The next one is Isaac Newton. We all know the story of Isaac Newton. He was a noted alchemist, right? That was his big thing. He was most probably on the autistic spectrum. Yeah. He remained a virgin until his dying day. Well, even after he was always a virgin in emulation of his main man, Jesus Christ. Isaac Newton saw something of himself in Christ, or something of Christ in himself. He was born on December the 25th. That was his birthday. Of course, Newton formalized the laws of gravitation as we still understand them, but his big thing was that he invented calculus, the integrals and differentials that Dr. Weinstein and Mr. Howard spent so long discussing on that recent JRE. And the interesting thing about all of that is that calculus was also co-invented at the same time across the English Channel in Germany by a guy that Newton never knew. And this would be Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Leibniz also wrote a book called The Monadology, which takes its name from the monads, which is one of the demiurges and the monads are some of the characters in the Hermetic tradition that builds out this whole idea that the God of the Bible, Yahweh, is one of any number of gods and possibly an evil one. But we don't have to get into that now. We just got to appreciate that Newton and Leibniz came up with calculus at the exact same time in geographically disparate locations. Very interesting. The second to last one is one that Dr. Eric Weinstein, I've heard him reference many times. Do you know one of the great alchemical symbols is the Ouroboros? It's the snake that eats its own tail. You can find little Ouroboroses in the artwork of the Palazzo Vecchio, the town hall of Florence, where the Medici ruled for all those decades. They would sneak little snakes eating their own tail in there as a way of thumbing their nose at the Vatican. Well, this guy, August Kukele, he was a German, and in 1865, he discovered quote unquote, the geometry or the ring shape of the benzene molecule. This is a discovery that's had massive impact on modern pharmacology. And he claims that he was having a daydream and he thought of the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail, and that's what made him think of the carbon ring with hydrogen ions attached to it that comprises the benzene, which is a drug that's still in common use to this day. Next one, Alfred Russel Wallace. We know this guy, right? He was in the Pacific. He was a scientist during the Victorian era with the stiff cravats and the weird whiskers. And he got malaria and had a crazy fever dream where he dreamt up the whole idea of evolution. And he woke up, he was so inspired, he jotted off a letter to his good buddy Charles Darwin, who at that time was back in London. And when Darwin got the letter and read it, he couldn't believe his eyes because Wallace had scooped him and had come up with... Darwin was busily working on the origin of the species, and he gets this letter with the same idea from the other side of the world, and he was confounded by that. And for decades... evolution was known as the Wallace-Darwin theory of evolution until Wallace understandably developed an interest in spiritualism that kind of embarrassed the stiffly cravated, scientists I just mentioned, and they removed his name. We just now know it as the Darwin theory of evolution. And then I got one last one for you. It's a little different, but we all know that our electrical grids run on alternating current. Direct current, like current that doesn't alternate, dies. If you try to put it through a wire over miles, you'll get a much weaker current at the other end than if you had an alternating current. Nikola Tesla invented this alternating current that doesn't decay. It's like a wave, and so you get just as much current at one end as you put in at the other. So you can have power lines that stretch hundreds of miles thanks to this alternating current. And Nikola Tesla thought this up, right? The famed Serb out there in Colorado, working his electric experience. We still haven't been able to emulate to this day. And the part I love most about this story is that Tesla came up with the whole idea for alternating current when he was contemplating the famous play Faust by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, the Austrian playwright who wrote this whole crazy play about a man who sells his soul to the devil and gets unimaginable power in this world, but at a terrible cost. We all know the sell your soul to the devil thing. And that's just what Tesla was thinking about when he came up with alternating current. So that's an interesting one, but all the other ones before that are all examples of major turns in the course of science that were inspired by exploding head syndrome or angels or fever dreams or visions of alchemical symbols. It really is wild. Science wants to, right? Science wants to pretend that all it's all very rational and all thought out. It's all well thought out. But really, what happens is you have a crazy trip, and then you come up with the work after the fact, and you like try to rationalize it all and explain to someone else how it all fits together and makes sense. So yeah, it is. I mean, I really think it's high time, Brian, for alchemy or magic or hermeticism or whatever you want to call it to start coming back. Because I think that much in the same way that the Copernican revolution blew minds in the 16th century, I think the Platonic revolution is due to blow some minds in the 21st century. I think, in other words, that this will be the defining debate of the 21st century, much in the same way that debating whether or not the sun or the Earth was at the center of the solar system defined the transition from the Middle Ages to the modern era. So, like I always say, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Well, on that note, I suppose I will invite our dear listeners to send us a note and let us know what you think of this lengthy and exhaustive repudiation of the veracity of science. You can direct your emails to nop@substack.com, and alternatively, if you want to read some exciting essays in vein of the rant you were just treated to, why then you can log on to nop.substack.com and check it out there. And with that, we'll bid you adieu.
All right, see you folks.